October 14th, 1944. The Vosges Mountains lay smothered under a blanket of fog so thick it seemed to muffle the very heartbeat of the forest. Dawn didn't arrive here in light. It seeped in, pale and reluctant, a thin silver wash across the tangled pines and slick granite ridges. Every branch sagged with moisture. Every breath hung in the air like a ghost. And every American soldier trudging through the mud knew that today would be worse than yesterday, because every day in the Vosges was worse than the one before. For the men of the 141st Infantry Regiment, the Alamo Regiment, this stretch of the forest had become something close to a nightmare. Communication lines went dead constantly. Patrols vanished. German shadows moved between the trees with an eerie silence that made some of the younger replacements whisper that the woods were haunted. Veterans didn't believe in ghosts, but they knew enemy skill when they saw it. Something in these hills didn't want them moving forward. Private First Class. Daniel Wyatt tightened the straps of his field jacket as he crouched near a splintered stump, checking the tension on the wire reel strapped to his chest. 23 years old, thin but wiry, with dark hair matted by drizzle, he wasn't a rifleman today. He wasn't even supposed to be near the front line. He was a telephone lineman, one of the men the US Army relied on to keep communication alive when radios choked in the trees or were jammed by the enemy. In Missouri, before the war, he had climbed wooden poles along quiet county roads, repairing storm-snapped wires while farmers brought him coffee from their porches. Out here, the work was the same in theory, but every line he fixed was another reason for a German sniper to shoot at him. This morning, the line had gone dead twice. Someone out there, someone skilled, was cutting American communications with an almost surgical precision. Wyatt's job was to trace the line, find the break, and repair it under fire before the front companies lost contact with artillery support. Lieutenant Keating found him crouched beside the company's junction box, mud streaking his gloves. "Wyatt," Keating said, voice low and tight. "Line's cut again past the ravine. Probably the same bastard as before. I need you moving." Wyatt nodded, not trusting his voice. His stomach knotted the way it always did, right before crawling into the trees alone. But fear was an old companion now, sharp, cold, and tightly folded into the corners of his mind. He followed the wire into the fog. The forest had a shifting quality in this place. Shadows moved even when nothing was there. Needles fell in soft drifts, masking sound. The slope ahead dipped into a shallow ravine, hemmed in by slick stone. Wyatt slid carefully, keeping low, eyes scanning every angle. A man didn't survive long in the Vosges unless he learned to look for what didn't belong. A broken branch, a displaced pine cone, a faint glimmer of metal. He spotted the break before he reached it, not frayed, not torn, cut clean, with sharp edges that still glistened from the morning damp. Beside the severed ends, pressed into the mud, were boot prints. Deep, precise, narrower than American ones. German. He knelt, pulled his pliers with slow, practiced movements, and began stripping the insulation. His fingers trembled in the cold. Then he heard it. A click. Metal. Soft. Patient. Wyatt froze. 30 long seconds passed. Then the forest cracked open with a rifle shot. He threw himself sideways as a bullet sliced bark from a tree behind him. Splinters peppered his cheek. He rolled behind a rock, breath ragged, heart pounding so hard he thought the sniper could hear it. He scanned the tree line with frantic precision. Movement. A glint of glass. High angle. 40 meters upslope. He sighted the scope reflection, faint, flickering, and fired. Missed. Adjusted. Fired again. The sniper collapsed like a sack of grain, tumbling down the slope until his rifle clattered on stone. Wyatt stayed down, waiting for a second shot, a second sniper, a trap, but nothing stirred. The forest swallowed the sound of the kill. He forced himself to breathe. Then he crawled to the wire, repaired it with trembling fingers, and followed it back toward the company command post. Lieutenant Keating saw the mud splattered across Wyatt's face, the shaking hands, the blood on his sleeve. "Christ, Danny! You get hit!" Wyatt shook his head. "Sniper," he whispered. Keating didn't smile, didn't praise him. He simply nodded once, the way men did when they understood another man had just walked through hell and come back. By midday, the temperature had dropped again. Fog thickened, German patrols harassed the flanks. The Americans pushed only a few yards forward before being pinned by hidden machine guns somewhere on the ridges above. Rumours spread quickly among the soaked soldiers that the Germans had moved elite Jaeger units into the forest, that they were tracking American positions with uncanny accuracy, that someone, or something, was always watching. Wyatt felt it too, a pressure, a presence, like eyes in the trees. That evening, as the men huddled behind soaked ponchos and ration tins, Wyatt crouched inside a small shelter tent, rewiring a junction box by lantern light. The air smelled of pine sap, sweat, and cold metal. Sergeant Miles sat nearby, hands wrapped around a tin cup of bitter coffee. "You know what this feels like?" Miles muttered. "Feels like we're walking into somebody else's home, somebody who knows every damn root and stone, and we're the mice." Wyatt didn't look up. He twisted the last copper joint, closed the junction box, and wiped moisture from his hands. He wanted to tell Miles he was wrong, that the Germans had no advantage, that the Americans would push through in a day or two. But he couldn't, because deep in his bones, Wyatt knew something was wrong in this forest, something tactical, something intentional, something that had nothing to do with superstition. Someone was cutting their lines with purpose, not to disrupt, not to confuse, but to watch them, to study them, to wait for the exact moment to strike. Wyatt fell asleep with that thought lodged in his mind like a piece of shrapnel. Tomorrow, he would discover just how right he was. Night passed without rest. The fog never lifted. If anything, it grew denser, a heavy, colourless curtain that made the forest feel sealed off from the world. At first light, the Germans struck. Not with rifles or artillery, but with something more unsettling. Silence. No movement. No gunfire. No patrols. Just the thick, wet quiet of a forest holding its breath. Lieutenant Keating sensed the danger immediately. He paced near the forward outpost, boots sinking into the mud. "If they aren't hitting us," he muttered, "they're setting up to." And he was right. At 0640 hours, the phone line went dead again. Wyatt was already tightening the strap of his wire kit before Keating spoke. No frustration now, just grim understanding. "It's the same team," Keating said. "They're cutting us to feel where we are. They're probing." Wyatt nodded once. "I'll go." He moved with caution sharpened by dread. The forest felt wrong in a way he couldn't describe, like someone had rearranged the trees overnight. The fog dulled sound, making even his own breath feel distant. He followed the sagging telephone line through the underbrush until he reached a narrow cut in the terrain, a shallow creek bed winding through boulders slick with moss. The wire ran into it. A bad sign. Wyatt stepped down, boots sinking into cold mud. He crouched low, fingers brushing over the surface of the line. That's when he saw it. The wire wasn't just cut, it was coiled. Someone had gathered a few feet of slack, wrapped it neatly, then severed it. That wasn't battlefield improvisation. That was tradecraft. German communications specialists, signals intelligence men, operators trained to deal with wire. Wyatt's pulse hammered. He followed a set of footprints up the slope, narrower, lighter than American boots. 3 pairs, a small team, skilled, organized. He was about to step over a fallen limb when he froze, a faint impression in the mud, heel to toe, weight distributed forward, a sniper's stance. He slowly lifted his head. A German marksman lay dead 10 yards upslope, face half buried in needles, likely the same man who had fired at Wyatt yesterday. But someone had dragged him, searched him, and taken his ammunition. The prince moved on. Wyatt tightened his grip on his M1. Whatever team had been cutting their wires wasn't just harassing them, they were repositioning, regrouping, preparing. The fog parted slightly. revealing an incline littered with pine roots. Wyatt crept up and stopped cold. There, half hidden behind rocks, lay something that made the air rush out of his lungs. American wire, a full spool of it, taken from their supply line, and it wasn't discarded. It was connected, running straight into the forest, deep, purposefully. The Germans weren't cutting the line to break communication. They were using it, tapping it, listening. Every order from Battalion HQ, every artillery request, every change in company position. Wyatt crouched low, heart thundering. He traced the stolen line with his eyes, seeing it snake around a cluster of boulders, down a slope, and into a shadowed section of forest where the fog pressed hardest. He had to know where it went. He moved silently, each step placed with deliberate care. Twice he dropped flat as distant German voices drifted close through the mist. Once he heard a twig snap behind him and didn't breathe for nearly a full minute. The forest swallowed sound and spat it back in fragments, making direction impossible to judge. After nearly half an hour of creeping, he reached a clearing, a hidden German listening post. Wyatt flattened against a tree, staring. Under two fallen logs, reinforced with camouflage netting and pine boughs, sat a small dugout lit by a dim lantern. Inside were two German signal operators wearing headphones, scribbling rapidly into notebooks as a field officer leaned over their shoulders. Every 30 seconds, one operator repeated American coordinates in a low, precise murmur. To the right, 3 riflemen guarded the approach. To the left, an MG-42 sat perched behind sandbags, its barrel angled toward the American lines. A runner jogged between the dugout and a small tent where a radio set crackled quietly. Wyatt counted men. 16, maybe more in the shadows. He didn't have a grenade. He didn't have backup. He didn't even have high ground. He should have gone back for help. He knew that. Every regulation demanded it, but he also knew something else. The regiment was walking into an ambush, a massive one. The Germans were feeding real-time intelligence to their artillery, their patrols, their machine guns, everything. And every minute the listening post stayed active meant more Americans would die. Wyatt backed slowly into the trees, retreating to a spot where the fog hung low and thick. His breath shook in his chest. He checked his gear. Rifle, wire reel, pliers, knife, no grenades, no explosives. Then something clicked in his memory. Something so out of place he almost laughed. A trick he'd learned repairing storm-damaged lines back home. A lineman's trick. Something used to pull down tree limbs too high to reach by hand. Wire could carry force, direction, even impact, if rigged correctly. Wyatt's hands began to move before his brain caught up. He slung the wire around a pine trunk, wrapped it around a fallen limb, ran it through a cleft between rocks, braced it across 2 smaller trees, creating tension, angles, a primitive but deadly pulley trap. He climbed a few feet up the trunk, securing the wire to a heavy, half-rotted branch that sagged under the strain. Then he crawled down slope and anchored the other end of the wire behind a root. Everything depended on timing, on tension, on one brutal jerk. He crouched, wrapped the line around his forearm, took a deep breath, and pulled. The wire snapped tight. Crack! 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 The log roof above the dugout buckled, shifted, collapsed. 2 German operators vanished under it instantly. The officer spinning toward the noise was crushed a moment later. The rifleman shouted, scrambling, unsure where the attack was coming from. The MG-42 team leapt up, sending a burst blindly into the fog. Wyatt fired twice. The loader dropped. Then the gunner. The MG-42 tumbled over the sandbags. Panic swept the clearing. A German runner fled through the smoke. Wyatt shot him in the shoulder. He fell screaming. Another sprinted for cover. Wyatt fired again. Silence. A third ran deeper into the forest and collided headfirst with the fallen branch torn loose by Wyatt's trap. His skull hit wood with a sickening crack. Within seconds, the listening post was in ruins. Within minutes, the German pocket controlling the ridge had collapsed into chaos. Wyatt didn't wait for reinforcements. He grabbed the nearest captured rifle for extra ammo, then crawled backwards into the trees, moving like a shadow, disappearing before the stunned survivors knew what hit them. Back at the American line, Lieutenant Keating stared at him in speechless disbelief as Wyatt emerged soaked, shaking, and covered in mud and pine needles. What did you do?" Keating whispered. Wyatt swallowed, voice hoarse. "I broke their line." But both men knew the truth. He'd done far more than that. He'd shattered the German intelligence network. He'd killed at least a dozen men with a lineman's trick. And he'd ignited a German response that was about to fall on the regiment like a storm. Because the Germans weren't going to let that humiliation stand. They were coming. And the real battle was only beginning. The counterattack did not come in daylight. The Germans waited, silent, calculating, enraged, until the forest had sunk into a blackness so complete it was hard to tell earth from sky. The fog thickened, rolling between the trees in pale rivers. Even the Americans' lanterns felt smothered, their glow swallowed inches from the wick. Men whispered that they could smell the attack coming, like cold metal and wet leaves. Wyatt sat with his back against a tree, arms wrapped around his rifle. He had not slept. His hands had not stopped shaking since he destroyed the listening post. Every so often, he felt the copper bite marks left by the wire loops on his forearm. His trap had saved lives. But it had also triggered something else, something furious, something ruthless. Shortly after midnight, the forest exhaled. A flare ripped open the sky, turning the fog white. Gunfire erupted in a single monstrous wave. Machine guns, rifles, mortars, grenades. The entire forest came alive with explosions. "Contact!" someone screamed. German voices barked commands in the darkness. Boots pounded through the underbrush. The enemy had come in force. 2 full companies, maybe 3, sweeping between the ridges in a coordinated assault designed to break the Americans in one brutal thrust. Wyatt leapt to his feet, firing blindly at first, then with precision as figures emerged from the mist. A German rifleman lunged from behind a cedar trunk. Wyatt shot him twice, the man collapsing in a heap. Another darted through the brush with a grenade raised. Sergeant Miles tackled him from the side, and both men rolled downhill out of sight. The forest became chaos. Flashes ripped across the fog. Dirt flew in geysers. Men shouted, fell, crawled, bled. The German plan was clear. Split the American line, sever the creek bed flank, and collapse the regiment's centre. Wyatt heard Lieutenant Keating yelling orders somewhere behind him, but the gunfire blotted out everything. Then a runner slid beside Wyatt, panting. "Sapper team, creek bed, heading for command post," he gasped. Wyatt's blood turned to ice. The command post wasn't just where the officers were, it was where the artillery maps were, the phone switchboard, the liaison wires. If that fell, every gun on the ridge would go silent. Every company would be fighting blind. Without thinking, without waiting for permission, Wyatt sprinted toward the creek. He knew exactly where the sappers would go. He had seen them earlier, 6 men with explosives strapped to their backs. If they reached the command post, they'd collapse the dugout, kill the staff inside, and shatter the regiment's chain of command in one blow. Wyatt slid down the muddy incline, nearly losing his rifle. German shapes moved in the fog ahead, low, purposeful, disciplined. The sappers. He counted them by the way they moved, bent low, carrying weight, stepping in a staggered line to avoid mines. He pressed himself into the mud, watching them advance to the narrow choke point of the creek bed. A downed tree lay across the water, forming a natural bottleneck. Perfect. His mind fired through the memory of his lineman's trick. Force, angle, speed, placement. He unwound the last coil of telephone wire from his kit, hands shaking from adrenaline. With fast, desperate motions, he looped the wire around the fallen trunk, twisted the end around a jagged root on the opposite bank, and stretched it across the creek just inches above knee height, invisible in the fog. He crouched low, heart pounding, breath shallow, waiting. The first German hit it hard. The wire caught him square across the thighs. His legs shot forward, his upper body slammed backward, and his skull cracked against a stone. He went limp instantly. The second sapper tripped over him and tumbled into the creek. The third fell to his knees, shouting in panic. Wyatt sprang from cover. He fired. Once. Twice. The third sapper collapsed. The others jerked back in confusion as rifle fire erupted from the shadows. Their line disintegrated. One tried to prime a charge. Wyatt shot the detonator from his hand, sparks flying. Another fled deeper into the fog, vanishing like a phantom. Wyatt gathered the explosives and hurled them into the creek, letting the water drag them away downstream. Then he rose, chest heaving, and ran back toward the American line. The counterattack had grown worse. Grenades shattered trees. Machine guns raked the trenches. German troops surged like a tide, forcing the Americans back step by step. Wyatt saw Sergeant Miles dragging a wounded private behind a boulder. Saw Lieutenant Keating firing point blank into the fog. Saw a German officer charging with a pistol raised. Wyatt shot him through the chest. Then the fog flashed white. A flamethrower. German assault engineers pushed forward, spraying fire in long, sweeping arcs. The flames lit the mist in dancing orange reflections, turning the forest into a nightmare of smoke and silhouettes. Wyatt scrambled behind a root mass as fire licked across the trees. The heat scorched the air. Then the flamethrower tank exploded, whether by sniper or stray bullet he never knew, and the blast knocked him onto his back. He coughed, ears ringing, vision swimming. Shapes moved everywhere, some American, some German, some he couldn't tell. He staggered to his feet. Then a German NCO blindsided him. They crashed into the mud, rolling violently. Wyatt felt the man's weight crushing the air from his lungs. A fist smashed into his jaw. Wyatt grabbed the German's wrist, twisting hard until the NCO grunted. The man lunged, hands closing around Wyatt's throat. Wyatt clawed for the pistol on the man's belt, found the grip, ripped it free, pressed it against the NCO's ribs, and fired. The body went limp. Wyatt shoved him aside, gasping, spitting mud. The battle raged for another 20 minutes that felt like 2 full hours. Gunfire rose and fell. The German assault surged, faltered, surged again, and finally broke. Not because the Americans outnumbered them, not because the terrain favoured the defence, but because the Germans had lost their intelligence network, their listening post, their sappers, their coordination, their advantage, all because of one lineman's sabotage. At dawn, the forest lay in a pale, exhausted silence. Fog drifted in soft ribbons between broken trees. Bodies, weapons, and blasted earth marked the terrible outline of the night's struggle. American medics moved slowly among the wounded. Officers counted the dead with grim, hollow eyes, but the line had held, and the regiment lived. Major Harrison arrived shortly after sunrise, walking the battlefield in stunned disbelief. Reports trickled in from every company. After compiling them, he scribbled a notation in his booklet. Enemy casualties within 300-yard radius, 96. When he reached Wyatt, he paused. The young lineman sat on a fallen log, staring at the torn coil of wire still wrapped around his arm. Mud covered his uniform. Dried blood, some his, most not, stained his sleeves. "Private Wyatt," the major said quietly, "you saved this battalion." Wyatt shook his head slowly, voice nearly gone. "I just fixed the line." But the men who survived knew better. They knew that a telephone repairman from Missouri, armed with nothing but instinct, courage, and the clever violence of a lineman's trick, had turned a battle around with wire and willpower. They knew that 96 German soldiers never made it out of that forest. They knew that the intelligence network that should have broken them instead died under falling logs, snapped cables, and traps no engineer could have anticipated. In the Vosges that day, a soldier's rifle mattered less than the mind using it. And the forest, still and heavy with fog, kept the memory close. Like a secret whispered between trees, a lineman saved them. A sniper finished what the wire began. And 80 years later, men would still speak of the night a simple trick became a weapon.